So it is with Christ's payment for our sins upon the cross. As he died, he said, "It is finished," using a Greek expression, tetelestai, which meant that the debt had been paid in full. Yet the New Catechism of the Catholic Church says, as sacrifice, the Eucharist is also offered in reparation for the sins of the living and the dead, and to obtain spiritual or temporal benefits from God. That is like trying to pay more installments on a debt that has been paid in full. Clearly, the Mass is a denial of the sufficiency of the payment Christ made for sin upon the cross. That is a grave error, and those who trust in the sacrifice of the Mass receive no benefit from Christ's actual sacrifice on the cross and are lost forever. In order to carry on the work of redemption, the Catholic priesthood claims to perform the miracle of transubstantiation, turning bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, quote, under the appearance of remaining bread and wine, unquote. This is supposed to be a great miracle, even though the wafer and wine remain unchanged in physical appearance and taste. Yet there's no such miracle in the Bible. Did Christ ever give a blind man his sight under the appearance of the man remaining blind? Did he ever raise a dead man to life under the appearance of the man remaining dead? The dogma of purgatory is another abomination. Vatican II says that although Christ suffered to bear our eternal punishment, we must personally suffer to expiate the temporal punishment due for our sins. Quote, sins must be expiated through the sorrows, miseries, and trials of this life, or in the next life through fire and torments or purifying punishments. In purgatory, the souls of those who died in the charity of God and truly repentant for their sins and omissions are cleansed after death with punishments designed to purge away their debt, unquote. Yet Peter himself declared that Christ has, quote, once suffered for sins, he the just for us the unjust, that he might bring us to God, unquote, not to purgatory. There's a further contradiction. Although Catholicism says we must personally suffer, it also says we don't have to. Masses and rosaries can be said, even after one's death, to reduce one's suffering in purgatory. For those who die wearing the brown scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel and fulfill certain other obligations, that apparition of Mary promised to go into purgatory the Saturday after their death and take them to heaven. Therefore, they don't have to personally suffer. Although they believe that Christ's sacrifice on the cross was not sufficient, its alleged repetition in the Mass, if done enough times, will eventually get one to heaven. Moreover, good Catholics may offer their own sufferings to release souls from purgatory. Padre Pio, recently deceased and made a saint by John Paul II, manifested the stigmata, that is, bleeding from the hands and feet and side, for 40 years to pay the penalty for the sins of the world, so that souls could be released from purgatory. Of such alleged saints, Vatican II says, quote, they have carried their crosses to make expiation for their own sins and for the sins of others. They were convinced that by their suffering they could help their brothers to obtain salvation from God, unquote. Again, we see the fatal denial of the sufficiency of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. For centuries, the payment of money was to have brought deliverance from purgatory. That practice eventually troubled Martin Luther's conscience and sparked the Reformation. Who can forget the infamous sales pitch of the Dominican friar Tetzel, commissioned by Pope Leo X to reap a fortune for Rome? Quote, as soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs, unquote. With such fraudulently obtained money, St. Peter's Cathedral was built and repaired. this was nothing new. Rome had consistently sold salvation for centuries. Popes published lists of every crime from incest to piracy to murder, and the price for which the church would give absolution for each. For example, a deacon guilty of murder could be absolved for 20 crowns. The anointed malefactors, as they were called, once pardoned by the church, could not be prosecuted by civil authorities because the church reigned supreme. Here's a further abomination: filling the woman's cup, selling tickets to heaven that actually send people to hell. Similar practices continue in Roman Catholicism to this day. This is a Mass card obtainable from any mortuary. Fill in your name and the name of the deceased. In exchange for an offering, the priest will place the card on the altar when he says Mass, allegedly reducing the time of suffering for the deceased in purgatory. Of course, the Church makes no guarantee as to how much the suffering will be shortened, nor how many more Masses must be said before the gates of heaven can be opened. Consequently, multiple Masses are purchased in the hope that eventually there will be enough. A friend told me that at his father's funeral more than $2,000 in Mass cards were purchased. Vatican II declares, "The Church teaches and commands that the usage of indulgences, such as Mass cards, a usage most beneficial to Christians and approved by the authority of the sacred councils, should be kept in the Church, and it condemns with anathema those who say that indulgences are useless or that the Church does not have the power to grant them." Some Catholics claim they don't believe in purgatory and indulgences, regardless of what the Church says. But if they don't fear their Church's anathemas condemning them to hell, why do they still trust her promises to get them to heaven? There are 20 complex rules governing indulgences. Rule 17 explains that the use of a crucifix, rosary, scapular, or medal can gain a partial indulgence. But if this object of piety is blessed by the Pope or any bishop, the faithful who use it with devotion can also gain a plenary, that is, a full indulgence, on the feast of the Apostles Peter and Paul. Here's another abomination, filling that gold chalice. What kind of God grants special favors to those who possess a scapular or medal blessed by a priest or bishop and used on a feast day of Peter or Paul? Keep in mind that the Catholic Church is saying that these objects have power to provide what Christ's sufferings on the cross could not. Speaking of abominations, the woman is called, quote, the mother of harlots, unquote. In addition to spiritual harlots, Roman Catholicism has created literal harlots by the millions. Innumerable celibate priests, bishops, cardinals, and popes throughout history have had their lovers. There were popes who were the sons of supposedly celibate popes. Pope Silverius was fathered by Pope Hormisdas, and John the 11th by Sergius III. The list of bastards who ruled the Church includes Popes Boniface I, Gelasius, Agapetus, Theodore, Adrian IV, and others. No wonder Pope Pius II, who himself fathered illegitimate children, said that Rome was, quote, the only city run by bastards, unquote. For centuries, it was a favorite joke that Rome had more prostitutes than any other city because she had the most celibates. The sexual exploits of supposedly celibate priests and nuns, once hushed up, are increasingly being brought to light. Homosexual priests are dying of AIDS worldwide, with estimates that as many as 70% of priests in some seminaries are practicing homosexuals. The Roman Catholic Church in America